Good morning. My name is Phillip Gales, and I'm one of the entrepreneurs in residence here at Ryerson DMZ. I specialise in operations, data, and metrics. One of the reasons Ryerson DMZ is one of the world's leading tech accelerators is that participant companies have access to a host of EIRs like me that they work with on a weekly basis. Our EIRs have typically founded, co-founded, or scaled a variety of different companies and are deep experts in their areas. The expertise includes product, sales, marketing, and a whole host of other areas. And today, I'm going to give you a taste of what it looks like to work with me around operations. By way of background, I spent most of my career working in operations at a variety of different companies, including a food delivery marketplace company, an oil and gas data analytics company, and more recently, I'm building an automated data science company. I've been involved in a number of fundraising rounds, and I've raised around $85 million for a variety of different companies at a variety of different stages. Companies work with me on a weekly basis during the Accelerator program, and I specialise in operations, and I'm going to show you what that would look like and hopefully give you a few things to think about with your company and a few takeaways, as well as giving you a bit of a feel for what the program looks like. So, I typically start off operations meetings with companies by disappointing them. And I disappoint them because companies come to me and they want to know what the best CRM to use is, or should they be using Xero or QuickBooks, and how should this work? And I encourage them to take a step back because I've seen a whole host of different things work at different companies. Every single startup is different, and every single startup's needs are very different. And this might mean that the optimal operations for one company is a few people working in a Google Doc, and the ideal operations for another company is a highly automated back end with a whole host of connected databases, microservices, etc. Or it might be just a whole host of different services duct taped together via Zapier. And so the first thing we start to talk about in operations is what exactly are the drivers of that company. I can dive into the details of implementing Zendesk, but if Zendesk isn't the solution, if customer support isn't your problem, then that's just a waste of my time and yours. So what we're going to do today, and what we do when we start operations mentoring, is we're going to look at how we can understand your company from a high level and work out what the main drivers are that we need to work on. I'm very fortunate to have spent a lot of time with Ralph Rikers, who has taught me a lot about operations. And he always led me down the line of trying to understand the startup as a production line. And so we use that analogy as a way of starting to understand, or at least simplify, the complexity of a startup. And a lot of this is based upon a great book called The Goal, which I would highly recommend you all read. So, in a very, very general sense, we can say that a startup looks like a set of interconnected modules. And typically it looks something like some form of top of funnel sales. So maybe marketing or sales outreach or some form of landing page, but generically some form of marketing that leads into some form of sales. Maybe this is conversion via a sign-up form, or a salesperson running you through a demo, or inbound calls, or people going out into the field and actually demoing a product, which then results in some form of active user. Typically, once you have an active user, you've got a whole host of different things that you need to do with that user, like, for example, invoicing them, collecting accounts receivable, so some form of accounting. Maybe you have some form of customer support where you're answering problems or questions. Maybe you have some form of upsell. Maybe you're trying to sell them more seats, or you're trying to upsell the product itself. You're trying to add features. And then inevitably, you churn some customers, and maybe you have some function of win back. And so we can start to very generically talk about a startup as being a number of interconnected blocks like this. Now maybe your company has an outbound sales channel and an inbound sales channel. So you say, well, Philip, mine doesn't look like this. Well, it's quite simple. Maybe we have inbound marketing into sales and you have outbound sales. Maybe you have a business development rep calling and then you have someone doing a demo. So maybe your company is made up of a few more blocks. Maybe you don't have some of these blocks, but we can just generically think about a startup as being comprised of these individual components. Now, once we start to do that, it becomes interesting because we can analyze each of these components individually. And historically what has happened is that people, experts, tools, etc. have focused on each of these areas. Example, sales. We're fortunate at the DMZ to have some amazing sales EIRs. There are experts who have dedicated their lives to sales. They typically use standard tools like CRMs. There are standard ways of analyzing it like sales funnels. There's typical metrics. There's nomenclature. There's typical words, etc. that you use in this area. And this replicates itself in each of these areas. Example, marketing. Accounting. Products like QuickBooks, Xero, accountants themselves, customer support. These are all areas in which people have dedicated their lives and built products to optimizing that particular area. And that's great. But the problem is that if you optimize one part of your startup, it can often be at the expense of another part of a startup. For example, if you optimize your marketing funnel and you're shoving through leads that are in fact poor leads, then you may overwhelm your sales funnel. And your salespeople are suddenly wasting their time selling to the incorrect person or the incorrect type of user. And so when we look at a startup, when we look at it from an operational perspective, we need to think about it holistically. It's not just about optimizing your marketing, or optimizing how efficient your customer support is, or optimizing how many sales you're doing. It's about looking at the company holistically. Now, we can do that a number of ways. One of the great things about this analogy of your startup as a production line is that we can imagine each of these blocks as an individual component in a production line, like a car manufacturing plant. There's a block that stamps out the panels, and there's a component that screws in some screws, and there's another component that puts this together into the car. So we can use the analogy of a startup as a production line. And this means that we start to access a whole host of operations management theories and practices. So we could say that from a broad perspective, this block of sales looks a little bit like some form of function with a set of inputs and a set of outputs. And the inputs are maybe things like marketing qualified leads and salespeople, maybe some money, maybe a CRM. And the outputs are maybe active customers or deals closed. And we can start to define some form of function that connects these. So maybe you can start to say things like, well, one salesperson churns out 10 closed deals per month, so 2 salespeople would probably churn out 20. Or 2 salespeople might churn out 20 sales per month, but if I added in our CRM, it would make them more effective, and they might churn out 25, etc. It also means that the outputs of one stage are often the inputs of the next stage. So we can start to model this as a series of functions with various inputs and outputs, etc. And hypothetically, we could make some horrendous and enormous nonlinear equation where all these functions lead into each other, and we could optimize over the entirety of this. And believe me, I've tried to do this, and it's amazing, and you can't do it, but never mind. So we're in a bit of a conundrum here. We've got a model for a startup. And we know that we need to optimize the entirety of this, and we've got a way of thinking about it. But we can't do the math on this. And so this is where CAC, customer acquisition cost, and LTV, customer lifetime value, come in. Because the great thing is, when we're trying to optimize the entirety of this company holistically, we have two very, very simple measures that enable us to understand that. And that is customer acquisition cost and customer lifetime value. Just to make sure we're familiar with these terms, your customer acquisition cost is the total cost of acquiring a single customer. So say you have to do 100 demos in order to get 10 people to consider your product, to get one to actually buy it, then you have to factor in the cost of all those 100 demos, the time involved, the salaries, the headcount, the tools, etc. being used, just to get down to that one customer. And then once you have that customer on board, that customer is going to pay you, and you derive some value from that customer. And that's the customer lifetime value. And that's not just about them paying you, say, $100 this month. That's about the customer continuing to pay you money into the future. So maybe you sign them up today, and you expect that they'll be on your platform for the next 24 months, so their customer lifetime value is maybe something like 24 times $100, $2,400. And the great thing is that these two measures cover the entirety of what is happening here in our startup. And the ratio of customer acquisition cost to customer lifetime value is highly indicative of whether a startup is doing well. And typically a rule of thumb is that you want a ratio of 1 to greater than 3. And what this means in very, very simple terms is that every dollar you put into your sales process should yield $3 back from your customers over the life of those customers. Now obviously you're putting that dollar in about now, and that $3 is coming back over the next few years, so there's a time difference in these. But if your ratio of customer acquisition cost to lifetime value is below 3, then you're probably in a poor place, and if it's greater than 3, then you're in a good place. Certainly, if CAC to LTV is 1-to-1, then it means for every dollar you put in, you get $1 back, which is a very poor investment. But the measure of the two of these allows us to look at the company holistically. And this means that we can start to work out what the problems are. Because if you do not have this ratio, then you have two options. You can either reduce your customer acquisition cost, or you can increase your customer lifetime value. And there's a few ways that you can do that. In terms of your customer acquisition cost, we can look at a different sales method, or we can try to optimize your sales. And in terms of customer lifetime value, this is perhaps in terms of increasing the revenue per customer or the life of the customer. And so where we start in operations is that we use this measure of customer acquisition cost to customer lifetime value to give an overview of your company. Once we have an overview of your company, then we can start to diagnose if the problems or the solutions lie in customer acquisition or in customer lifetime value. And if the answers are things like we have a very expensive outbound sales method, then perhaps what we need to do is to work on an inbound method, in which case we need to be looking at various marketing tools. We need to be automating that. We need to be trying to reduce your customer acquisition cost using tools in that area. But if you're selling to customers where you can only sell to them by meeting them, you can only go out and meet them in person, you can only demo, then we can't do anything customer acquisition cost. So then we need to start looking at how we increase your LTV. So this might be things like implementing a ticketing system, so your customer support is better, you more quickly respond to customers' needs, and therefore you retain them better. Or it might mean that we look at different ways of increasing the price. It might mean we start looking at product solutions to increase the value, or perhaps upsell things. It might mean that we have to dig into bugs and the reasons that your customers are leaving. And so we use these measures of CAC and LTV to try and holistically understand your company. We're trying to holistically understand your company because it doesn't make sense for me to just implement Zendesk if, for example, your problem lies with sales. And so typically, we start operations by looking at this and we dig into what the main drivers are. Once we know what the drivers are, then we start to implement processes around those. I would encourage you to start considering customer acquisition cost and customer lifetime value for your company, and start to try and work out what those main drivers are, and use that to understand where you should be focusing your time. Thank you. I hope this has been an indication of the sort of work we do here at the Ryerson DMZ and what we would do in an entrepreneur or an EIR meeting with me. If you want more information, I'd encourage you to go to our website, and remember that applications close at the end of next week on the 30th of November. Thank you very much, and I hope to work with you soon.